Hi everyone and welcome to this video on demand. We are looking at demand in a real simple way today, and what we're trying to do is trying to get down into our revision sort of period now and just look at our real basics and have some revision around this. So starting off with demand today. So demand, we always start off with the definition, and our definition is there and it's quite simple, but there's two key words here that we really need to lock in with. Okay, so the quantity of good or service consumers are willing and able. So if they're only willing and not able, then they don't have demand. And if they're able but not willing to buy it, they don't have demand. So for example, if you go to the supermarket and you see a nice bag of Brussels sprouts, you may have the willingness, the ability to buy it because you have the money, but the willingness because you do not like Brussels sprouts, you do not want to buy it. Okay, so demand is the quantity of good or service people, consumers, are willing and able to purchase at a range of prices in a given time period. Okay, and I'm going to skip forward. I know we did some work with supply demand schedules and stuff, but we're going to skip through that work and get to the next bit, which is the law of demand. And today, our law of demand does not change. Our law of demand says as price increases, quantity demanded decreases, vice versa, ceteris paribus. In the red bit in the middle there, I've just kind of put in a note why this occurs. So this is because it is relatively less affordable. And how we remember that is demand has an A in it. Okay, demand has an A in it up here. Okay, and so when we talk about demand, we talk about affordability. Okay, rather than when we get into supply, we'll talk about profitability because it's got other stuff, but we'll cover that in our next video. Okay. Price changes when we get to demand. Okay, when we have a price change and we get to demand, it's again we're trying to stick with that law of demand, and we can see it here that we have a movement along the curve. I do have a hint there that whenever we're drawing a demand curve, we reminded that the D in demand is downwards. Okay, so the D stands for downwards. Okay, so we always draw our demand curve heading to the floor. Okay, so D for down. And when we have a price change of a good or service, there's a movement along the curve, as we can see in that graph. And a really key point here is that we have done our three arrows. So we've got an arrow here showing Q1 to Q2, we've got our price drop, and we've got the movement along the curve. Okay, so again, really easy stuff. As you may have pointed out, in this, and purposely I've not done it to show you how important it is. This diagram currently means absolutely nothing because we haven't put our labels on our axes. Okay, so price up there, quantity down here. Okay, so make sure every time we draw a graph, we've got our price, our quantity on each axis, and we've shown our arrows. Okay, moving along to keep this video nice and short, we're going to talk about the determinants of demand. Okay, the determinants of demand are the no ticks factors, and my hint for this one is you need to think D like a dog. And if you're any yoga athletes out there, how you combine these two ideas is the downward dog is a very famous yoga pose, and that's how you remember that the demand curve is downward sloping and the dogs have or want no ticks. Okay, and that's how we're going to remember the determinants of demand. So no stands for the number of consumers, and again, if the number of consumers is going to go up, our demand is going to increase. If the number of consumers in the market is going to decrease, our demand will decrease. Taste and preference, okay, this is a quite common one, and the easiest one to think about that is fidget spinners. A few years ago, there's a really high drive towards fidget spinners, and subsequently we had a real big drive because there was a taste and preference towards it. Okay, so demand increased. Now in modern times, again, when our taste and preference has moved away from fidget spinners, and therefore their demand for fidget spinners has decreased. Okay, the incomes of people buying them. So if your income increases, typically your demand will increase. We're not going to go into inferior and normal goods at the moment. We're just going to keep this really simple. So our theory is if your income increase, your demand will increase, and your demand will decrease if your income all of a sudden goes away. You think about people who are made redundant or people who lose their jobs, they have to now remove the luxuries in life and go towards spending on what matters, so their demand decreased for those goods. A complement, really key point here again, complement is with an E, okay? A compliment with an I is something you give in terms of a thank you or something like that. A compliment with an E is what we're talking about here, something that goes with something else, and it's the price of the compliment. The reason why I've put price of at the end is because else it doesn't really work with our acronym there. But compliment, the price of a compliment is really, really important. So, for example, we always use the hot chips and tomato sauce example is if the price of chips goes up, the demand for tomato sauce will ultimately come down and vice versa there. Okay, and then we move into substitutes and the price of substitutes, and the easiest one we talk about here again is butter and margarine. When the price of butter goes up, as we're seeing in the supermarkets currently, it's about $8.50 to even $10 for a block of 500-gram block of butter at the moment. So if we look at that, there's a more drive towards and a higher demand for margarine currently in New Zealand. Okay, and as we can show down the bottom there, as we can see with our nice graph, again, I've purposely left the labels off the axes just to prove a point that we always need to label our axes because it's really, really important to show the marker what we're doing. And these factors either shift the curve either positively or negatively. And we can see D1 to D2, which is these two here. Okay, we have a decrease in demand, and when we move from D1 to D3, we have an increase in demand. And that is a short, sharp summary of demand for this video.